To enjoy this and other great episodes on Patreon, check out the link in the description and subscribe via the Black Kluge tier for full access to over 100 exclusive episodes. For those of you who would like some QF swag on TeePublic, t-shirts, magnets, mugs, what have you, also click on the link in the description.
But the stir was definitely on it, and I can imagine a lot of people were puzzled, going, "Why is Rhea Perlman's big sister on the?"
Did you ever watch it when it was aired there as well? I mean, if you having been a Stern fan, or when you stopped, that was it. You didn't no curiosity about that whatsoever.
AGT was when I stopped listening for good, and I did dip in now and again, but that was it for me. And I think it was funny because I heard James was saying something about it's like leaving a cult. There's no big bang. It's a slow. Takes a slow process. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and there's the seeds of doubt get sown, and they grow over the course of a couple of years. But I think by the time AGT came around, there was nothing left. I think for me, it started around early 2009, which is funny. It's where this whole clip originates from. Yeah, and it was 2 or 3 years of Artie leaving, and then the control and I suppose, when did Marcy Turk come in? Maybe 2013.
Well, according to what we understand, she was indoctrinating him into the way of the GTD, from the summer of 2012-ish, maybe the spring even. And then by the time the birthday bash rolls around, which is the following February, probably February, Super Bowl time. And so she was well and truly established there.
Yeah, the birthday bash I never knew about that really. I knew about it from looking at it on Reddit. But, who was the guy they had from Brent Hatley? I never heard an episode with him on it. Never heard an episode with Mehmet at all. I remember seeing on YouTube they had the IQ test, and Brent is lying. I never even knew what that was all about, so I was long gone by that stage.
Yeah, well, the parts a lot of what you covered, what you didn't cover, we covered when we were at the old place. We're at Radio Gunk, and then so through them and through just keeping an eye on the forums, I was keeping half an eye on what was going on, but mostly at the time I was listening to the Artie show with Nick DiPaolo, and then after that I said, well, geez, some people are starting up this, anti-Stern. It's more fun to hate on him now. It's just like Kiss. I'd much rather be a Kiss enemy than a Kiss fan. And so, it's all a matter of, I guess, whatever floats your boat at that given time. So this particular episode, ladies and gentlemen, is about about earlier in the year, I think 2008, around the Artie's second book, Crash and Burn, and this year he got Tony Siragusa to give him a man cave for that house on the Jersey Shore, and whatever happened, it's another example of Gary glomming off Artie to get something. But I think it was a situation where Siragusa thought, okay, well, if I did it for Artie and we got some good publicity about it, why don't I do the same for Gary? The amount it'll cost to do his whatever room, his man cave, is less than the coverage we'll get by having them mention us on the show for DIY stuff.
Yeah.
And I gave you a selection of things to choose from, and you chose this one because they're bitching about the concept is they're bitching about the way he laid out his theater room, his cinema room, because he's got about 8 leather chairs, those big, lazy boy recliners, and then there's a partition at the back. And then some stools, like pub stools, basically. But there's a section almost like at the top of any stadium, like a hockey arena or a football stadium, where you've got standing room, but then there's a perch so you can put a drink on it and whatever. I'm sure almost every stadium has that.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah. So
I think the point here is we probably have to think about what type of people get a home theater. There's different types of people. There's the purist, someone who just doesn't want it for show and just wants to watch movies on a big screen. Then there's maybe the like this one is kind of where there's a project, although Gary didn't do it maybe, but it's a home DIY project. And then I think there's it's a status symbol, and it's something that you can brag about, and it's also something that people with a bit of money get. And I think Gary and certainly Wiggy fall into that last group.
Well, yeah. I mean, Howard likes to. Well, he was always liked luxuriating in whatever he could. I mean, in terms of getting the best of whatever he can, whatever somebody tells him is the best, he'll go get it. But with Gary, it's a combination of, yes, he loves movies, he loves listening to, watching shows, and watching sports and stuff. So it makes it functional. I get, but at the same time, he was definitely all about. Do you remember that one segment of the show where he was featured in some kind of architectural digest, his home, like a Cribs type thing, and they were goofing on his choice of albums, like one of whom you would agree with, the Steely Dan's Asia was one he picked, and they were just goofing on him completely. And for some of the choices, it makes perfect sense. And then, but they were mocking him incessantly, and about the picture. The picture it's featured of him and the family. I'll never forget it. Artie said, Gary looks like a guy installing cable.
But I think Steely Dan was always something that Gary came back to. And I think hopefully you're going to cover, which is that audiobook segment from his.
Oh, yeah, we're going to do the Gary book, shitting on Gary's book saga, definitely, and that's going to take multiple episodes, because he wouldn't shut up about Gary's book. He was so pissed off that he had the audacity to A, release one, and B, that he thought people would be interested in that world. I mean, yeah, there's always going to be people interested in a book by someone if it's any good, but Gary's book was horrendous. I mean, aside from his irreverent stuff about his mother and I did find that on a human interest level, it was fascinating, but I don't really care about Gary that much.
No. I mean, you would care about Gary if he left the show and was writing some kind of a tell-all. That's a different story altogether. But when he's just talking about how Steely Dan Asia would sound good on a jukebox, I mean, who gives a shit? And still holds up. Still holds up.
Top 25 songs to eat with a slice of pizza on the jukebox, at Dino's Bar and Grill. Yeah, it was really ridiculous. And you're right. And he told Stuttering John in his book explained, again in his own wet brain way, that Don Buchwald nixed the idea that he could release a book. When he was one short period in John's so-called career, he had Buchwald as an agent. And the concern, I'm sure, on Buchwald's thing was, number one, you can't release a book if Howard hasn't released a book, or if you can't compete with my main client. Mm-hmm. But number two, he was worried, what would John say in this book that we don't want out there? Mm-hmm. So with Gary, he had to run it by Howard or somebody like Don Buchwald and say, look, is this okay? Is this okay? And it couldn't be anything behind the scenes. And that's all people wanted.
Well, didn't Gary say that Howard was a great father? I mean, that'll tell you everything you need to know about how censored he is and how, Yeah. But I think for this clip, I think it's worth putting it in context of where Gary was and where the show was, because the move to satellite was in 2006. And I'm imagining that they all got a big lump sum.